Good morning, everybody. I have a tendency to ramble, so I've actually organized speaking notes. So if you bear with me, I'm going to read them so that I just stay focused on the task at hand. Let's start with this. I'm really a newcomer in the VC world. I've just completed my first year at iNovia, and honestly, I love it. I'm really delighted to be part of this community funding innovation. I also made some surprising observations in my first year, both about the VC world, but it also helping me to reflect on the time I spent in much larger organizations, such as Google. And it's with these reflections that I'm driving implications that are going to shape my own personal behaviors of years to come. And that's what I come here to share with you today. So let's say you're an entrepreneur in tech and you want to start your company. So you nailed your big idea and your business model. You have your team, your pitch book is ready. You're pretty sure you have a shot at being the next Google or Apple. And then most of the conversations quickly circle around, TAMs and moats and margins and pre-money and 20x exits. And yet, through all the conversation, one of the most fundamental decisions, the corporate structure, will probably be an afterthought, both for you as VCs and for you as founders. In today's world, your lawyer won't even blink, and they'll go through the easiest path of no resistance and organize yourself as a for-profit organization. This decision may be, in fact, one of the most consequential lost opportunity of your career. Let me argue that today, and this is the topic of my conversation for you today, is that traditional for-profit organizations may have made sense until the middle of the 20th century, but they have proven to be woefully insufficient for today's economic realities, and certainly for the coming century. The good news is that founders have an attractive alternative today that did not exist even a few years ago. It's called the B Corporation. B corporations are for-profit. They want to make money. But it goes beyond not only the explicit use of their article of corporations to reaffirm that profit motive, but it goes beyond to commit a balance between the interest of profit making, the environment, and the community explicitly. So me today, I want to call on every one of us to at least explore establishing B Corps with these three pillars going forward. So let me start with some truth that I believe are foundational for this conversation today. First, make no mistake. I am a capitalist. Not only am I a capitalist, I see capitalism as a huge force for good for the world. Capitalism still allows for the most efficient allocation of resources, for the profit motive to continue to be a big source of inspiration for innovation, commerce, and a really positive force for humanity. So I really believe in promoting capitalism. The second thing is technology is an amazing driving force for the world, as we saw this morning. Technology has provided humanity with untold benefits, and we take it for granted too often. I mean, the invention of the wheel and the brick is still with us today. And today, how would we live without ibuprofen or the World Wide Web? Humanity is really indebted on the countless innovations that have pushed it forward, especially in the last 250 years, since the Age of Enlightenment. I always say it's better to be a poor Canadian with a skin infection, an ulcer, or a toothache in 2019 than Louis XIV with the same things. So I believe really in promoting the advances of technology. And then finally, just to put the context, there's tons of recent public about the battling between, should we push individualism versus socialism as the main driving force of progress? I just think that this is simply a false premise. It's in our nature as humans to be fundamentally symbiotic relationship between both of these. We participate and we benefit from a world of specialization of labor, and we share the needs of some of our social organizations in which we all benefit. On this topic, I just highly recommend Edward O. Wilson's The Conquest of Earth. If you're curious about our biology as fundamental humans, it's an amazing book. The truth is that despite all of our individual ambitions and entrepreneurship, so the selfish side of us, we really remain deeply indebted to the sum of the history of public and private investments done before us. And should we never forget, specifically about, and thank you, was it General, our lasting peacetime that has enabled us to, and so many of us, to build such a prosperous society. I need to quote Warren Buffett in his last letter to shareholders on this one. He quote, and I quote, "It is beyond arrogance for American businesses and individuals to boast that they've done it alone. The tidy rows of simple white crosses at Normandy should shame those who make those claims." So, with this as context, let's jump to the meat of the issue, that traditional non-profit, for-profit organizations, which have made sense for nearly 300 years, are now insufficient to today's economic reality. So, quick history of corporations. Let's remind ourselves of what they do. They provide amazing advantages. Although some form of corporations really date back to the Romans, for the purposes of our conversation today, we're interested about 18th century. You know, the expansion of commerce in Europe, the creation of companies such as the Hudson Bay Company here in Canada or the Dutch East India Company. These for-profit corporations were set up to finance high-risk ventures of global proportions, like the spice trade. And these corporations were, at the time, an unbelievable innovation in themselves. Look, they offered, we take it for granted today, but they offered the following four things: the ability to raise large sums and enabling pooling of risk and upside, enabling limited liability, which is an amazing invention, ability for the corporation to outlive its individual creators, and a side benefit, you know, with multiple shareholders led to the creation of the stock market. This is a big innovation. It's like insanely cool. Through the creation of for-profit corporations and pooling of capital, large sets of innovations were funded, which led to the Industrial Revolution, creation of railways, industries, the modern economy as we know it. We owe so much to the creation of this amazing thing, the corporation. And supported by legally protected property rights, unleashed a huge flood of innovation that delivered our modern world, our increased standard of living, and that of billions of people around the world. But the for-profit corporation, from its humble beginning to today, remains an organization which aims to earn profit through its operations and concerned with its own interest. It's the latter part of this sentence that we're preoccupied here today. Not that we aim for profit, but that it is concerned with its own interest and solely its own interest. Here lies with me the core disconnect of today's world. Such definition was super well suited in the age of exploration of the 18th and 19th century. The Enlightenment brought with it a period of tremendous optimism. It enabled Western Europe to finance unbelievable expansion in trade. It was an age of optimism, a time where everything seems to be possible and the world seemed to have unlimited resources. It was an age when a vast majority of population lived in rural areas on subsistent farming and farming at small scale. It was a time when our capacity to dramatically influence our biosphere was in fact very limited by our global footprint and our access to technology. But we are here today at the dawn of the 21st century, and we have to recognize that the forces that are shaping our world have just fundamentally changed. And with this new era, it's logical to test if corporations, the way we set them up originally, still make sense. So what's different that would warrant such a change or questioning it? Well, in fact, a few absolutely dramatic and profound changes in our world, and we can't avoid them. The first one is the environmental crisis upon us. We have to recognize mankind today is now influencing the global ecosystem in a way that can essentially destroy the planet. Two, the pace of innovation, which is a super good force for good, it's just accelerating at breakneck speed. And with it, globalizing the planet, and by the way, as a byproduct, and we'll come back to that, creating huge labor disruptions and concentration of wealth creation. And all this, meanwhile, our public institutions are basically failing to cope with the new reality on both counts, especially as the challenges, really, they're national now. So let's look at quickly in turn on each, if you allow me. So despite all the political rhetoric, the facts are overwhelming about the environment. Here are just a few examples. We're harvesting the world beyond its capacity, driving species extinction at a record speed. There was a great UN report that I highly recommend you read a couple of weeks ago. 1 million animals and plants are going to go extinct on our watch. You don't have to point to anybody else. It's on your watch as much as mine. And as I traveled the world, I took a 2.5-year break, everybody knows. I really got struck with one thing. When I was in Antarctica, you go to Antarctica thinking that you will see untamed nature. I went to Antarctica to see a land in recovery. Let me make you the sad case of whaling. A few generations ago, the oceans were teeming with these large animals, these mammals that are our cousins. What seemed like an unlimited resource at the beginning of the 19th century faced complete and utter extinction just a few years later, and was only saved by technological change brought about by the advent of kerosene. Without kerosene, the whales would be like the dodo bird. Your children would never see a whale. Imagine a world without whales. But in the span of a few hundred years, technological advances enabled the whaling industry to go from a pretty risky business, capturing a whale on these little tiny boats. And by the early 20th century, we would take out from the ocean 50,000 whales a year, decade after decade. Oceans are covered with plastics. We all know this. And of course, we even created the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, a floating plastic landing covering the area of Texas in the Pacific. Again, I've traveled all over the world. I can tell you, we are covered in plastic. There is not one atoll in the Pacific that is not covered in plastic. And of course, if you go to the Club Med, they pay the kids to clean up the beach before you show up in the morning. It's covered in plastic too. And finally, we're cooking the planet, as we know. The global temperatures are climbing at alarming rates with untold consequences to the biosphere. And here's the issue. The heart of the environment crisis and absolutely amazing dramatic market failures are the three main factors really deeply embedded in us. First, we have to recognize it. We're unparalleled predators. And there's no counterbalance to us right now on Earth. We love to kill and destroy for our short-term benefits. Essentially, we control the Earth's resources as we speak today, and with the population explosion of the last few hundred years, we can and do destroy elements of nature to points of no return. Second, which is amazing, we're hoarders. We've lived 3 million years starving. It's burnt into our DNA, and we can't help but hoard. Even beyond what seems ludicrous in terms of reasonableness, and what would constitute anywhere a very reasonable standard of living. We can't help ourselves. And with industrialization, we've created an entire model of constant consumption that feeds this just natural need of us to hoard. And worst of all, we live on short time. We have short attention spans. We live within the needs of our daily and monthly survival, answering to our need of procreation, barely thinking of the needs beyond the next generation, let alone 3 or 5 of them. And it's also reflected in our institutions. Let's be frank about it, right? 4-year election cycles, quarterly results for businesses, daily news, instant tweets. That's the world which we live in. And these factors at work, no wonder we have great difficulty coping with environmental issues. Second force, acceleration of technology. Tech transfer is leading to an acceleration of globalization, rise of large business disruptions, and with the consequence of increased capital concentration. What's amazing about our technology world today is in the last 30 years, the world has shrunk unbelievably. Like just 30 years. And mostly for good. To this day, the pace of technological innovation is only accelerating. We've all seen the charts of, oh, my time's up. Wow. Okay, so I'm going to do this quickly. We've all seen how fast technology is accelerating. Think of the adoption of TVs versus the cell phone versus Twitter. But with this scalability, with this global acceleration, oh, actually, let me ask you this. I know we're completely out of time. Do you give me 5 minutes to finish this thing? Or do we have to run? Thank you. Here's the attributes of our digital world today. Global scalability. They're global in business. Our businesses are global in nature. These businesses, by design, have network effects, and especially because of AI. So you basically have a real shot of having a global monopoly. And we expect huge productivity gains, which is huge positive, but also massive impacts on labor pools. The best example of this, self-driving cars. What a great promise. Everybody should drive safely. We all agree to it. The issue is, there's roughly between 3 and 5 million truck drivers in the US alone. Double that for Europe. You have 10 million people who are going to be out of work like this. And today, the for-profit organization doesn't have to care about this. It really doesn't. Because it's led by a private corporation, sole benefit to shareholders, the traditional C Corp. And I won't have time to talk about governments, but in short, they can't cope with it. Just think of the taxes. Apple didn't pay taxes for years. And no government could deal with it, because even the OECD can't cope with it. And then the explosion of data. They can't deal with Facebook, which is an amazing issue. So the options for the path forward, and given this diagnostic, everybody should feel depressed right now, but I don't. I actually think there's a huge cause for optimism. We're an amazing species. We're smart people. In politics, there's a lot of things going on that actually you should be, some are depressed on some side, but I actually think there's a lot going on. But meanwhile, we live in a business world. We have many more options. And a silver bullet is now available to us. We both have an option when we set up companies through the cooperative structure. In 2006, 3 friends left their careers in business and private equity and created an organization dedicated for mission-driven companies to protect and improve their position and impact over time. What's magical about the B Corp is that you can become a very successful company, make huge revenues and profit, which is an accelerating trend, and take on investment activities across the 3 axes in confidence and with pride. Imagine a world where a self-driving car company sets itself up and sets a special pool of profits to reinvest in the retraining of the people directly affected by the technology, instead of celebrating putting them out of work. Imagine a pharma company that commits that it'll distribute its drugs on the basis of the ability to pay, so that developing countries don't have to wait decades to get the same levels of service as the rich world. Imagine a company that is using non-biodegradable material and committed to deliver a 100% recycling program. And finally, imagine Amazon and Apple paying their fair share of taxes in the communities in which they operate, without the threat of being sued by their shareholders, because it's legal what they're doing today. B Corps didn't exist 15 years ago. They're an amazing innovation. If every entrepreneur took the time at the outset of their journey to build the next Google and Apple, to think of the potential impact of their environment and community, in addition to their margin model, and incorporate all this in a B Corp certification, I'm telling you, the world will be super different in 20 years. The story of humanity is a story of not accepting the status quo, of curiosity, exploration, innovation. We are on the dawn of a new digital age, and whether you're a venture capitalist, like I am now, a pension fund or an entrepreneur, we all have a huge opportunity. I'm therefore encouraging everyone to meet, to explore the B Corp, and hopefully, one day, they will read about an era of the corporation as we know it today, and they will say, "Oh, that was crazy and weird." Welcome to the era of the B Corporation. Thank you so much for your time.